Fortunately, I did actually pass with 70. This exam is the one that I found to be the hardest professional level exam. So yeah, you're hearing that correctly. I found it to be harder than BPT. I really did just struggle with tax compliance, to be honest. This is an exam I genuinely thought I failed. You know, once you've sat the exam and you just start preparing for your research straight away, like that was me. I didn't even know if I should put my books away. I was so sure that I failed, but fortunately I did actually pass with 70 actually, which is pretty good. So hopefully you'll be able to do the same. According to the ICAEW syllabus, the aim of TC is to enable students in straightforward scenarios to be able to prepare tax computations for both individuals and companies, understand the tax implications of a course of action, and to explain potential tax treatments of transactions. So in my own words, I feel like it was just an exam full of tax computations, so both for individuals and companies. So as I did in the professional level exam breakdown, I'm going to just give you the key points of TC because it of course helps to know the basics of the exam to be able to then pass. So this is a 2.5 hour exam, similar to the majority of the other professional level exams, and the prerequisite for this exam is kind of obviously the certificate level principle of taxation. There are 5 key examinable areas in this exam, so I would break those down as ethics and law, indirect taxes, capital taxes, corporation tax, and then income tax and national insurance contribution. So this exam is not open book, but you are allowed some permitted text, which is those Hardman's tax rates and tables, and that's quite helpful because it will be very difficult to memorize it all on your own. And then the pass mark, which I'm sure you're interested in, is 55, and as per my difficulty video, the average kind of pass rate is about 75%, so it is somewhat still fairly high, but it is definitely an exam that requires practice. So as with all these exams, I always say it's worth checking if you are eligible for any credits to prior learning, so any exemptions. I think TC, that actually did really help me with BPT, but there was actually a girl in my class who was sitting TC after BPT, so I don't really think it caused too many issues, and then perhaps you'd also have an exemption for that as well. So I don't know, it's worth just having a look into and thinking about. Fortunately as well, if you are doing the ACA qualification, then after TC and BPT there are no tax requirements within the advanced level exams. So the exam structure for TC, I found it to be just very straightforward. It's pretty clear cut from exam to exam. So I'll put the syllabus area here so you can kind of see the breakdowns of those different examinable areas. The biggest area is the income tax and national insurance contributions, and that was about 30 to 40%. Those capital taxes as well, I think that's also where you can really drill in those pro formas, and I'll come on to that, but I think that's also where you can get some good marks. And of course the easy marks, which I always say, which is ethics. So because of those really chunky areas that I just touched on, some people might be tempted just to really focus on those and neglect the others, but I would honestly really avoid doing that, to be honest. I think because there is so much content in TC, so knowledge and skills in this exam is actually 65 to 75%, which is very high, and then the application is just 25 to 35%. So what you're really seeing is that because there is so much knowledge and skills required in TC, it's hard to just completely nail one tax area. I feel like in this exam you probably are most likely to just drop half marks here and there for really like nitty-gritty kind of knowing the exact tax rules and the specifics. That's just why I feel like you have a much better chance of passing if you do kind of learn all of those taxes. And given the exam structure, it is likely it will all be examined, so it is worth doing. So let me boost your confidence hopefully and go back to those easy marks which I mentioned, which is ethics. So this is actually 5 to 10% of the marks, which if it's 55 to pass, that is actually a very good chunk. What can be particularly good about the ethics marks in tax as well, that unlike other professional level exams where the ethics marks might be kind of scattered about, this question is always the first in the paper, so there is always a designated ethics question. So typically the question will be about 7 marks, and I found for TC it's a bit more predictable. The common areas that I found tend to come up in the tax ethics questions are, of course, then tax evasion, tax avoidance, money laundering, things like that. So once you practice a few, hopefully you'll really start to pick up the tricks to get those marks. I would probably actually advise grouping those different types of ethics questions together and kind of building your own model answers and just, really getting confidence with that. So hopefully when you get into the exam, you really can nail those marks. So assuming it does set you off to a great start, that is perfect. But if not, it can knock your confidence, but it is not the end of the world, so don't worry. It's obviously, of course, better to practice and try to get those than just not at all. So coming on to the permitted Hardman's text, what you would have found if you've already started studying for TC is that there are just so many tax rules, so many tax rates. It's just, it's a lot. I would probably, for timing purposes, try to memorize, and it'll come with practice, but try to memorize the key rates off by heart, so the income tax rates and things like that, and that should hopefully just kind of save you time in the exam, which is very important. Like I said though, you don't need to know it all off by heart because you do have the tax rates tables with you. I would personally advise just really taking the time to just highlight it up, tab it up. So for example, the inheritance tax taper relief, that's all in there. So just find out where it all is basically and just know what's in there, but then also know what's not in there. So something, for example, that isn't in there is those allowable expenses, and I found that can actually be quite tricky. So with that, whether it's allowable or disallowable actually depends on the wording of the question. So really do look out for that and try and get as good at it as you can, because it is tough. So I found the best way to do well in TC is to really nail those performers. So this is, for all the different taxes that you can be examined on. So capital gains tax, inheritance tax, especially income tax, corporation tax, including those capital allowances and things like that. Like I said, I do think inheritance tax is a really good one, because if you can nail that, hopefully you can pick up a lot of marks there. So in my How to Pass FAR video, I did say a consolidation a day keeps the reset away. Hopefully it could maybe be the same for TC with the inheritance tax questions, although the marks do vary a lot more for this one, but it is still worth practicing often. So you might be thinking, how do I actually nail the performers? Well, you'll probably hate me for saying, but it is practice. You do just need to practice. It's not going to come from just reading through the content. You do really need to take the time to start practicing as soon as. So I personally would recommend going through the content at least once over and then going straight to the question bank. So a good example I can give you as to why is, for example, there was a tricky corporation tax question where the reporting period was over 15 months and the tax treatment did kind of differ. So it is definitely worth doing question practice, because if you just kind of read the notes, you'd never really, or it's very unlikely you'd remember how to do that. The question practice, of course, as well, will really highlight any weaker areas. I mean, hopefully you don't have any, but it will help. So in terms of how to go about the question practice, I do think it will help just, really back to back doing those questions from the same examinable area. If you do actually need help with a study plan, then I do offer that. So check out the link in the description below and you can set up a session with me and I can help you put together your own study plan. I've recently just done that for someone in the December TC sitting, so fingers crossed he's passed. He did pass the mock, which is a good sign. But yeah, where it's really good to practice back to back is definitely those indirect taxes. That's really an area where you'll realise actually there's not as much in it as I thought. Make sure as well that you are, from the start of question practice, really reading the questions carefully. There are, for some taxes, different treatments between individuals and companies, so do look out for that. And then also don't forget to take a step back, look at the bigger picture, because there could be more than one tax involved, for example, between capital gains tax and inheritance tax. So for this exam as well, just really try not to forget what you learned in principles of tax. There will be a lot of recap, but in some areas there might actually be additional content. So, for income tax, don't just think, oh, I kind of know it, I'll be fine. You do still need the practice. Capital gains tax, for example, it starts to include extra reliefs and things. So the content isn't always even exactly the same. So just bear that in mind. I think the way that you need to approach the tax compliance exam is actually pretty different to some of the other professional level exams. So what I really mean by that is that I just found that it's harder to just nail the questions and to score those top marks, unless, for example, if you do work in tax or if it's something that you are really good at. I personally did just find that TC is just harder to really learn the content. I found with maybe FAR or FM, it was a bit more logical. Things did kind of make sense, but for TC, I didn't really find that logic in the tax rules. I think a lot of it I was just trying to memorize rather than actually thinking how it kind of made sense. Maybe it's just me, I just couldn't really find some of the links sometimes. So, constantly going over the content will help you with your memory, and also learning from your mistakes is a big one. But because there's just so much content and so many rules, it can be quite difficult to remember all of them. So what I really mean by changing your approach for the exam is just knowing that you might not get every single tax rule, and for each of those you'll probably lose, say, half a mark. And that is okay. Remember, it is 55 to pass. I think with tax compliance, the key is that you just keep going, keep persevering. I know I had a really bad mock exam and I wanted to walk out, but I made sure I just stayed there and just went through it all. And I think I actually did manage to pass it. So it does just go to show with tax compliance, you never really know, but perseverance is key, and just kind of be okay with dropping the odd few marks here and there. It doesn't have to be perfect to pass. If you can get the overall gist of the taxes right, the pro formas, you can follow it through to the end. There's no negative marking, you do still get carry through marks. All of that should be a positive, and hopefully, you can pass. So what actually also really helps is the examiner comments in the ICAEW Question Bank answers. So do read through those as well if you ever have a few minutes. So TC, it is a 2.5-hour exam, 150 minutes, which means it is 1.5 minutes per mark. So on the first page of the exam, it will tell you how many marks and sub-marks each of the questions are worth. So what I would do is use that and then convert it into actual timing. So I'd times the number of marks by that 1.5, so you'll know how many minutes to spend on it. And then the software actually counts backwards, so the clock goes down, which can be a bit confusing. But if from that starting time of, say, 2.5 hours, you work backwards, you should know when to move on from each question. So I don't actually recall TC being too time pressured, but it wasn't like I had loads of time. In terms of how to as well answer the questions and in which order, I'd say it's personal preference. Maybe go with the taxes that you're most comfortable with first. To be honest, for me, I just found the order of the exam was fine for me, and I did it that way. For you, if you really prefer one, then do that first. Hopefully it can build your confidence. But perhaps the worst could happen where it kind of actually doesn't. And that happened to me in my CR exam. It was just, not the one. What I would say though is just really pick a strategy, do it in your mock exams, your progress tests, just all the practice that you do. And then the ICAEW exam software, it is constantly changing. It changes all the time. So to summarize TC, it's probably 3 P's. So it's the pro formas, it is to practice, and then to persevere. So there are links to past papers in the description below, and I'd really recommend doing those, especially in that software. And if you do want to connect with other ICAEW students, and I do have these Telegram groups available, and you can connect with others there. So good luck. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, then do give me a like. Any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'd be happy to address those. And as always, I'll be back with more videos every single week, so hopefully you'll see me again soon. Thanks.